Let's go to Mick Mulvaney. He is a former Chief of Staff at the White House and now at Bondi Partners. Mick, always good to talk to you. Look, we can pretty much throw the questions out that I had prepared for you a little earlier this morning because so much has happened in the last half an hour or so. First of all, Donald Trump, he is no stranger to hyperbole. He uses this kind of language. This is diplomacy, information warfare, whatever you want to call it via Truth Social at the moment. He basically set out this convoluted timeline for a ceasefire, which I don't even know how you phase in a ceasefire anyway, saying Israel and Iran have agreed to it. We're starting to get confirmation from Iranian officials that, yes, they have agreed to a ceasefire. What I'm not clear on is what terms they have agreed to. But I mean, what's going on here? Trump seems to be front-running this a lot. First of all, you know, he got into, well, not a forever war, but he got into this war when a lot of his base didn't want him to. Now he's playing peacemaker just 48 hours later.
Yeah, where to start? It's always hard to plan for these interviews, isn't it? There's no chance, there's zero chance that Donald Trump made this peace deal announcement out of whole cloth. That's not his style. He wouldn't do that. So it's not a fabrication. It's going to have a kernel of truth and maybe a large kernel of truth. Does he front run things? Absolutely. Is he try to get the message out before everybody else? He absolutely does. It's part of his style and part of his modus operandi. You tell me something that I've not heard, which is a sort of confirmation from Iranian sources. The only thing I had seen before I logged on here tonight was a statement by the Ayatollah saying that Iran is a country that never surrenders. That's not really it's not a refusal to go to the peace table, but it certainly sounds awful bellicose.
Well, let me yeah, it was bellicose, absolutely. Sorry to interrupt you, Mick, but I've got it here, and it's worth taking the time to read it to you and our viewers. And this is via Reuters. It says Qatar's Prime Minister secured Tehran's agreement to the US proposal for a ceasefire. So Qatar's involved here. And it goes on to say, in the conflict between Israel and Iran, during a call with Iranian officials held after Iran's strike on a US airbase in Qatar on Monday, an official briefed on the negotiations told Reuters early on Tuesday. The phone call came after US President Donald Trump told Qatar's emir that Israel had agreed to the ceasefire and asked for Doha's help persuading Tehran to also agree to the ceasefire deal, the official said. So we're getting this via an official, via Qatar's Prime Minister, who's briefed an official, that official has been given permission to brief Reuters, and it's after a couple of phone calls. So, look, it's not exactly clear, is it? But it's got to be a good sign, and we've got to take what we can get.
They're good sources, but they're not primary sources. And I think, again, the Ayatollah, the last thing I had seen was the Ayatollah said everybody who knows Iran knows it's a country that doesn't surrender. That sounds fairly aggressive for someone who just agreed to a peace deal. But look, there's language in the statement even that Donald Trump put out that seems sort of a gray area to me about how the ceasefire will kick in after the final missions are completed. And it actually suggested that missions were ongoing when he sent out that tweet. So look, I don't want to be sort of a naysayer here, but you sort of try and read between the lines. I do hope there's a peace deal. I absolutely do. And if it does, we could talk next week about peace through strength, because if there is a peace deal, this is what peace through strength looks like. But I've been through enough of these international sort of events to know that it's not really finished until it's finished. And again, this is a ceasefire, if you take Trump at his word, which I do, and not a peace deal. So there's still a lot left to be done. There's a lot of discussions about where the enriched uranium is or isn't. Are the Iranians willing to give it up? There's all sorts of things that have to take place before you actually can declare an end to the hostilities.
As you look at the situation at the moment, yes, there's a ceasefire that has been announced. Let's just, let us believe for a moment that, yes, it has been agreed to and all the terms are agreed to by all parties. Does this at the moment look like Trump has got away with a one and done? So he satisfies Israel and he satisfies the base.
Well, and not only that, that's the politics of it. He satisfies a basic fundamental belief that he had. which is Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. That a nuclear-powered Iran would be so destabilizing, it could well have and would expect to have implications far beyond just the Middle East. So this is a fundamental principle of Donald Trump's sort of philosophy about the world. So it's a huge success there if it holds. It is a message to all the folks around the world that the Americans have the ability to do things that other countries don't have. We can come into your country and blow stuff up without you even knowing about it. I think there's not nearly enough attention to the fact that it looks like not a single shot was fired at any of the American troops because the Iranians didn't know this was coming. There's all sorts of implications here. But the bottom line, I think, is this. If the peace holds, you may be looking at the most stabilizing event in the Mideast since the 1979 Iranian Revolution. You're talking about Iran no longer being a pariah state, certainly not being a nuclear-powered pariah state. Maybe they want to join in the conversations with the rest of the GCC about some economic stability and prosperity in the region. Maybe they have a conversation at some point about regime change internally, not having it forced on them from the outside. There's all sorts of things that can happen if this is really a peace deal that holds. And I think most of the things that can happen are positive. Yeah,
I'd like to know the terms of this peace deal as well. So nuclear facilities have been wiped out, if we believe that, without seeing the evidence, first of all. But you'd have to think with those MOPs being dropped, those ordnance being dropped on those three facilities, that some significant damage, and if at the very least, a huge setback for that nuclear program. But Iran hasn't agreed to stop. I mean, it has agreed. It's told it's going to stop coordinating with the Nuclear Energy Agency, the Atomic Agency. So then there's less transparency. Israel have said they want regime change. That hasn't happened. So Mick, where does this optimism come from that this might be the most stabilising move in the Middle East in many decades? And that's not to mention what's going on still in Gaza.
It is, but here's why I say that. I'm looking at the arc of history. I'm looking back to the first Trump administration when we were able to put the Abraham Accords into place. We're talking now about countries that 20 years ago were dedicated to the elimination of Israel off the face of the planet, who are now trying to have economic relationships with them. This was a groundbreaking event in the first term. And if you think that maybe there's opportunities for other countries to go the same way, you're talking about a fundamental realignment of things that happen in the Middle East, about a stability that hasn't existed since the 1979 revolution. So, yeah, I don't think I'm being Pollyannish. I don't think I'm being naive. But I do think there's an opportunity here if Iran is really serious about sort of joining the League of Nations, for lack of a better word, in the Mideast that want to live in peace and prosperity. That was not possible 20 days ago. Now it might be. But to your point, transparency is a big deal. Iran might agree to anything right now to stop the bombing. Whether or not they're then agreed to having folks monitor their behavior is going to be an interesting conversation. All sorts of things. We're a long way from the end of the road, but I think we're closer than we were before the bombing attacks on Saturday.
Yeah, look, I think so too, Mick. But we know, and you more than most, knows that Trump likes to be owed. He likes to have favours owing to him. What would he be asking of Israel?
To abandon the regime change thing. Trump, he sort of hinted at it today in a tweet, but keep in mind, Marco Rubio talked about it today, J.D. Vance talked about it today, Pete Hegseth talked about it today, talking about our cabinet, our vice president, and so forth, saying it's the position of the United States is not for regime change. Trump came out and sort of said something different on a tweet, but I listened to those three folks, and Trump has talked about no regime change in the past. I don't think we see that as in our best interest. So if you're asking me, what do we think we might get from the Israelis? Is look, if the Iranians are going to agree to all of the terms that we laid out, that we do lay out in a peace deal, you guys have got to stop for this pushing for regime change. That being said, this place is so combustible and so unpredictable. One of those last missions that we talked about just a few seconds ago, who knows? Might be the Israelis trying to take out the Ayatollah tonight before the ceasefire kicks in. It's just, again, you can. History is full of people who've misinterpreted the ongoing events in the Mideast.
Yeah, I mean, Israel has been, Bibi has been really forthcoming on what he wants. He wants regime change. He also wants to wipe out the Ayatollah. He said that a number of times. If that happened, that would be another escalation. wouldn't that bring the US back in?
I don't know. I don't see us going back in. Keep in mind, and you and I talked about this last week on the show, about what Trump's options were, what Trump likes to do. Trump does not want to put American troops on the ground overseas. That's not what he does. He's not interested in forever wars. We've worked hard to try and end our presence in Afghanistan. I think it's one of the things he probably regrets the most about the first term was that we didn't get that done. So no, Trump was going to be slow to escalate from here, I think, barring a direct Iranian attack on American assets. We know about the attack today on the Qatari airbase, but we also know the Iranians gave us a heads up on that, which sort of signals a de-escalation. So no, I think Donald Trump's natural position is not to escalate. He'd have to have a really good reason to vary from that.
I just want to finally ask you about the Conservative base there in America. I listened to Steve Bannon's War Room podcast soon after this strike. He has been, interestingly, one that has not been advocating for Trump to get in to another forever war. He was, I think, tacitly supporting Trump in this and the military in the strike on the nuclear facilities, but was saying, that's enough. That's enough now. We don't want to get involved in another war. And that's not what you went to the election promising. Tucker Carlson has been really interesting in his tete-a-tete with Ted Cruz, who I understand are good friends, but they fundamentally disagree, it would seem, on what support the US should give for Israel. How is all this influencing Trump, do you think?
Listen, I'm glad there's disagreement amongst our two political parties on war. I'd hate to think that there's a war party and a non-war party. I think the debate is healthy. The Republicans are divided on this. There's no question, just as the Democrats were divided on the response in Gaza. So, again, with a country of 300 plus million people, two parties, they're not going to be monolithic. But if you ask me how it affects Donald Trump, Donald Trump listens to a lot of people. Does he listen to Steve Bannon? Yes. But at the same time, he listens to Lindsey Graham, who is the closest things we have to a warmonger in this country. So Lindsey was actively, still as of earlier today, lobbying for regime change. I understand it. So there's going to be differences in the party. I think Trump right now listens to a lot of folks. But at the end of the day, on this particular issue, he comes back to his own base, his own personal base, which is Iran, no nuclear weapons. Anything beyond that is sort of is extra for him and not something he would do lightly.
Mick, great to see you as always. We'll check in soon.